Okay. Before we jump in, a quick but really important disclaimer for this deep dive.
Yeah.
The material we're about to explore is, well, it's explicitly adult. We're covering consensual non-monogamy, some pretty extreme online sexual fantasies, and we're going to get into discussions of sexual trauma responses and online toxicity.
So it's going to have language and themes that are, highly sensitive. It might not be for everyone.
Exactly. So please just proceed with that awareness. All right. Let's unpack this. I was scrolling late last night, you know how it is, and I found myself deep in these anonymous confession forums online.
Oh, I know the ones. The niche subreddits.
Yes. And honestly, the things people admit to wanting or doing privately, the really complex, kind of messy boundaries they're navigating, it just made me question, well, everything I thought I knew about my own boundaries. I mean, we're talking super specific, vulnerable details about relationships that just completely defy the, the standard monogamous script. Tell me I'm not the only one here who reads these and thinks.
But they're real.
Yeah. Was I just eavesdropping on someone's actual life, or was that all just like highly specific fan fiction written to hook you?
Well, what's so fascinating there is that the line between a real confession of fantasy and the actual ethical pursuit of desire it's a lot thinner and blurrier than we think.
Right.
You've really brought us a deep dive into these relationship structures that challenge the whole social contract of monogamy. But we also have to face the cultural shame and the just sheer toxicity of the online language that surrounds it all.
Exactly. And that's our mission today. We're going to try to cut through the judgment. We're exploring consensually non-monogamous relationships, CNM, what it really takes for them to work, the deep psychological stuff involved, and then how that pursuit of openness just collides with digital hate speech. This deep dive is powered by Neon Core Media.
So let's start with some definitions, because I think that's essential to even understand the landscape here.
Yeah.
Consensual non-monogamy, or ENM, ethical non-monogamy. Like a big umbrella term.
Right, it covers a lot of different things.
It does. It's for any relationship where partners agree it's okay to have romantic or sexual connections with other people. And the, public acceptance for this is growing fast.
It's not some like fringe thing anymore, which I think really surprises people who haven't looked at the data.
Not at all. The sources point to a 2023 YouGov America study, and it found that 12% of adults have actually engaged sexually with someone else with their partner's permission.
12%.
But here's the really telling part. 82% of adults, whether they do it themselves or not, said they approved of the concept. And that signals a huge shift in cultural tolerance, even if the practice isn't for everyone.
That conceptual acceptance is massive. But when you zoom in on how people actually do it, the structures get, well, they get very different and very complicated.
They really do. So we should clarify a few. On one hand, you've got things like open relationships or swinging.
Okay.
This model is usually centered around physical or sexual activity with others. The primary couple stays as the core, the main dyad.
And the language here has evolved a lot, right? We're not using those old terms that were pretty demeaning.
Exactly. That old term wife swapping was actively rejected by the community because it implies women are property, that they don't have their own agency.
Right.
So the shift to swinging or open really emphasizes that this is about mutual consent.
And then on a totally different track, you have polyamory.
Polyamory is where the focus really moves away from just sex and pivots to having multiple romantic, committed partners. The whole goal is to sustain these deep, meaningful, long-term connections with more than one person.
And that's where the structures can get incredibly complex.
Oh, yeah. Can you give us an example?
Well, one of the most common setups is the V structure.
V.
So imagine one person is the hinge of the V. They have two separate partners, and those two partners, the arms of the V, are not romantically involved with each other.
Wow. The emotional management there must be intense. You're dealing with time, energy, jealousy. They call it metamor dynamics, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So with all these different structures, Vs, quads, open, what's the common thread? What does the research say actually makes a CNM relationship successful and, fulfilling?
The research is super clear on this. Success is rooted in the quality of the interaction, not the quantity of partners. People who felt fulfilled all said they felt actively cared for, respected, safe, and, this is the big one, supported to communicate openly.
It's basically just good relationship skills, but turned up to 11.
Pretty much. But it's also so vulnerable to breaking down when the ethics get ignored. And that brings us to a huge pitfall the sources highlight. asymmetrical power dynamics.
Ah, yes.
And the classic, widely criticized example of this is unicorn hunting.
Explain that one.
So this is typically a pre-existing, usually heterosexual couple, and they go looking for a single bisexual woman, the unicorn, to join them as a third.
Okay.
The devastating asymmetry comes from the rules. Often, the unicorn is explicitly forbidden from having her own independent relationships, while the original couple keeps all their autonomy and their built-in support system.
So the couple gets 2 relationships, but the third person is basically just serving the couple's needs.
It fundamentally corrupts the ethical part. It shifts from non-monogamy to just selfish exploitation. And it really underscores why all the internal psychological work is so critical.
Okay, let's dive into that psychological work. The research found 2 core strategies people in C&M relationships use to make it work. The first one is individual effort.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the stuff people do alone, inside their own heads, to manage all the emotional complexity. And it goes way beyond just, good communication.
Much deeper than that.
Much
I
deeper.
agree.
We're talking about seeking out specialized counseling, a lot of self-reflection, and developing these really intense skills in emotion regulation and cognitive restructuring.
Cognitive restructuring, that's where you actively fight your own negative thoughts. That really stood out in the confessions from the research.
It did.
One participant said that when they felt this intense, painful emotion, they would try to rationalize it. The quote was, "I tried to deal with the emotion myself initially and rationalize it. Maybe try to change the narrative of the thoughts I have."
That is such a high-level psychological skill.
Yeah.
It's basically using tools from therapy, like DBT, but in real time. So when jealousy flares up, instead of lashing out, they're actively reframing it. They're changing, "they like my partner more than me," into something like, "my partner is investing in another connection, but that doesn't take away from ours." It takes incredible resilience.
So that's the work you do by yourself.
Yeah.
Then there's the part you have to do together, the back and forth between partners.
Yes, the working together piece. And there are 2 main parts to that. First is constantly offering assurances of love.
Because you have to keep the primary bond feeling secure.
Absolutely. You have to be really intentional with love languages, words of affirmation, acts of service, whatever it is, to constantly shore up that core connection. It's like scheduled maintenance for emotional security.
And the second part is cultivating growth. I love that phrase.
It's perfect, isn't it? It means the relationship isn't some fixed contract. It's alive. Cultivating growth means you accept that your needs, your boundaries, your rules, they're going to change.
They're unstable.
Totally. What worked last year might not work today. And you have to be willing to revisit those agreements and grow together instead of just clinging to the initial rules.
But all this relentless work is constantly being undermined by this internal conflict they all seem to share.
Yes.
The monogamy hangover.
Yes. That term just captures it perfectly. It's that deep-seated distress or anxiety or shame that people in C&M relationships feel.
And it's not because they don't love their partners.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's because they've been socialized their whole lives by a society that tells them their desires are wrong or immoral or unnatural. It's the voice of cultural shame living inside your head.
Yeah. One participant even confessed to thinking, wait, am I a really bad person for doing this thing that people think is so immoral?
And that's the sound of decades of cultural programming clashing with your authentic self. That's often a much bigger hurdle than, managing schedules.
And that internal struggle just gets validated by the outside world. The real-world stigmatization they face, the pressure of being closeted.
Especially for parents. How do you explain this to your kids or your conservative family? The risks are huge.
The sources mentioned a lot of fear, particularly among women, of being labeled a bad mom or a slutty woman.
And that fear forces them to stay closeted, which just isolates them from their support systems. And on top of that, you have the practical difficulty of dating.
A much smaller dating pool.
Dramatically smaller.
Yeah.
And the sources specifically noted that for minority participants, they often have to deal with racism and judgment on dating apps on top of everything else. So they're managing their own monogamy hangover, these intensive relationships, and external prejudice. It's exhausting.
Okay, so we've set up just how vulnerable this lifestyle is, and this is where that vulnerability just smashes head-on into internet culture, where the language of ethical connection gets hijacked and weaponized. Let's talk about the word cuck.
Right. The history of that word is just steeped in sexual shame. It's short for cuckold, from the cuckoo bird, right? The bird that lays its eggs in other nests.
So historically, it was about mocking men who were cheated on.
Exactly. Men who lost power to another man. But its modern use online, it's mutated into something else entirely. It's almost never about literal infidelity now. It's a social weapon. It's just shorthand for weakness or submission or a lack of dominance.
Yeah, you see it everywhere in political and manosphere contexts. Red pill, incel groups.
And it's used to police ideological purity. It's just an easy label. If a man shows empathy or supports progressive policies or is just not aggressive enough, he gets branded cuck.
So the message is, you're weak because you're being dominated, either socially or politically.
Precisely.
Hmm.
And we have to be clear, this weaponized slur is very different from the actual kink or fetish of cuckoldry, which in BDSM or porn is a tool for consensual fantasy.
Right.
But the line gets really, really disturbing when we look at how sexual kink intersects with racist tropes.
You're talking about the BBC acronym?
Yes. The sexualization of that term and the fantasies around it are tied directly to these harmful racist stereotypes of black men as being, animalistic, aggressive, hypersexual,
And then you see the mirror image of that with the Queen of Spades fetish.
where white women are actively fetishizing black men, and it often gets tangled up with the cuckold fantasy. And the sources make a critical point here. Some in the black community see this kind of race play as an extension of racism.
Peak internalized racism was one of the phrases used.
Because it's linked to how black sexuality was shaped and damaged by slavery and racist caricatures, it denies the person their humanity and just reduces them to a racialized stereotype.
So it dehumanizes the very partners it claims to celebrate. It's just reflecting these deep cultural anxieties about race and power, even in our most intimate spaces. Which brings us full circle, back to those anonymous online spaces. The Wild West, where all these fantasies, the healthy, the toxic, all of it live and breathe. When you look at platforms like Literotica or those subreddits, you see these stories about non-consensual themes, CNC or dubcon.
And they're shared as real encounters. We have to be really skeptical here. A lot of those sensational stories are just creative writing.
Often men pretending to be women.
Often, it's just niche erotica or a way to get attention. It's performance art that's pretending to be a confession.
But the sources suggest there's a really important psychological reason for these fantasies, especially for the women who consume or write them.
Yes, and this is a deep insight. The materials suggest that for some women, fantasizing about being forced in a consensual, non-consent scenario is a subconscious way to escape the guilt and shame they feel about their own desires.
Ah. Because if they were forced, even in fantasy, they don't have to take moral responsibility for wanting it. The blame is external.
Precisely. It just shows how profoundly our culture restricts female desire, pushing it into the shadow realm of role play so it can be expressed without someone feeling, morally culpable. It's a really sad workaround for social repression.
Honestly, talking about these stories and the fear of judgment, that internal shame and external blame, I'll be real, I've had those moments online. I've posted something risky, felt that rush of power, and then deleted it 5 minutes later in a total panic.
Terrified of the judgment.
Absolutely. We are all performing and consuming these narratives, all just trying to figure out where we land on that spectrum between desire and safety.
That vulnerability is the common thread for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're CNM or monogamous. We are all negotiating boundaries and shame.
So what does it all mean? We started with this desire for fulfillment outside the norm, which takes this immense communication and psychological effort. And we ended up navigating cultural shame and just toxic online behavior. The common denominator seems to be how deeply power, fear, and communication are intertwined in all of our intimate lives.
Totally. Whether you're monogamous or not, the success of your relationship relies on relentless communication and honesty, especially when you're fighting those internal shoulds, that monogamy hangover or external stigma. The biggest challenges CNM relationships face often come from societal judgment, not from the relationship model itself.
And that forces us to see the gap between our real lives and how the world sees us. I mean, the law often treats a person in a complex polyamorous quad as just single.
It's a willful blindness. It's absurd.
It is. So if relationships are in this constant state of becoming and unbecoming, this mix of fantasy, hard work, rule setting, and vulnerability, what obsolete social scripts are you still holding on to that might be holding you back from acknowledging the real complexity of your own intimate life?